Okay, everybody, welcome. If you're not me, if you could be on mute for the time being, that'd be helpful. I'm Warren Wells, Policy and Planning Director for the Marin County Bicycle Coalition, and oops, that's the wrong thing. Here we go. Welcome to our Bike Advocacy 102. This is the second in our series of Zoom advocacy trainings. This is the basics of Bikeways. So just a quick overview of the evening. This is the welcome now. I'll go quickly over MCBC, what our work does if you're not familiar with us, and our mission, staff introductions, recap Advocacy 101 briefly, and then kind of dive into the meat of this training, which would be planning for bikes. So we'll talk about speed and safety, types of bikeways, that's kind of, and intersections, those are the sort of biggest parts. We'll touch briefly on how do bikeways get built, and then we'll actually have a hands-on activity. We're going to send you to breakout rooms and have you design your own streets really quickly. Q&A and then wrap up. So just to review MCBC's mission, our mission is to create a healthy, connected, and sustainable Marin by promoting bicycling for everyday transportation and recreation. We just like to remind people that ahead of time. So here from MCBC staff tonight, we have me, I'm Warren Wells, Policy and Planning Director, as well as my colleague, Matt Farber, who's the Program Director of Corey's Ride. And we're happy to welcome you all here. Okay, so I'm just gonna dive right in, because actually in the breakout rooms, you'll get to introduce yourselves to the other people here. So I'm gonna dive right into the meat here, and then just for expectation setting, I'm gonna get everybody out by 8 o'clock this evening. Okay. So last month we covered Bike Advocacy 101. That training is on YouTube. I'll have a link. I'll post everybody a link to that. Actually, it should have been in the email we sent out. And if you're watching this on YouTube now, you'll see a link in the notes. So we covered in that meeting, we kind of went through the levels of government we're in. We talked about the difference between unincorporated county and incorporated cities. We talked about the different organizations that govern Marin, the county, the Transportation Authority of Marin, or TAM, as well as special districts like the Golden Gate Bridge, Marin Municipal Water District, Marin Transit, et cetera. We talked about the life cycle of a project, kind of like how a project goes from an idea to reality. So planning, design, construction, and funding. And then last week we did an exercise on how to have an impact and making a public comment at a meeting. Okay, so this meeting is about planning for bicycles and the basics of bikeways. So this is just kind of like transportation theory, the very, very basics. When you're planning transportation, you have three things. Well, you have a vehicle, you have your termini, your origin, and your destination, and you have the trip itself. So when we talk about vehicles, we also use the word mode. So that's walking, biking, bus, ferry, car, and cars usually in transportation research, we usually divide it into like a carpool versus a single occupancy vehicle. Each mode, there's not like a better or worse mode. They all have different benefits, costs, speeds, sizes. It's pretty far to walk to Humboldt, but if you're going to the grocery store 2 blocks away, maybe walking is the best option. When we talk about termini, these are kind of where you're starting and where you're going. So, your home, a lot of trips are home-based. A lot of trips are between home and work. And whether a trip works between those two places depends on whether you have parking, how easy it is to store your vehicle if there is one, if you are traveling with one at that place. And then you have the trip itself. So how are you getting there? What is the modes, the conveyance? There's a road, a sidewalk, a rail line, a pathway. That's kind of high level how we think about transportation. And so diving into bicycles in particular, we know that in the grand scheme of thing in America, not a ton of people bike for transportation. It's around somewhere between 1% and 3%, depending on where you are. In some cities like Davis or Berkeley, California, it's quite high, kind of nowhere near as close as high as it is in Copenhagen or the Netherlands or even Tokyo. And we know from research that one of the biggest barriers, perhaps the biggest barrier to people riding bikes more, is perception of safety. So people don't feel like don't feel safe riding bikes, and so they choose other modes, typically driving. And with safety, speed at impact is the most important factor in traffic safety. So you can see this graph here. This just shows you the likelihood of fatality increases exponentially with vehicle speed. So if you get hit by a car going 23 miles an hour, a relatively small number of people are going to have a fatal accident there. If it's 50 miles an hour, it's much more likely that you won't walk away from that. So people understand, actually, I think rightly, that biking next to rushing cars doesn't feel safe, and so they choose not to do it. But we can mitigate. So, and the speed. So the ways of mitigating this are by slowing the relative speed of a person on a bike and passing cars, or fully separating bicycles from traffic. And research shows that there is really high amounts of latent demand among people who are risk intolerant. I might be out on Sir Francis Drake, on a weekday morning, but my mom, pictured here, is going to much prefer a separate path like the Bay Trail she's biking on here. Okay, so that's kind of some highlight. That's why we're doing this in the first place. So next we're going to talk about, what are these different types of bikeways? We hear the class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4. It's very confusing. I just want to say at the beginning, there's not going to be a test at the end. Don't feel bad if you don't have it all memorized. That's what this is for. That's what we're here as a resource to answer these questions. And it took me a long time to actually kind of get this stuff to a point where I could say it offhand. Okay. So there's in California, we have a classification system for bikeways. Classes 1, 2, 3, and 4. Actually, often see them written with numerals. The ordering is confusing. There used to be just class 1, 2, and 3, and they added class 4 in 2017. And it's not a ranking. And I should say that context and design matter a lot. There's not a better one for all instances. There are some that are better in one place, some that are better in another place, and also the design, how they're implemented, can affect both the perception of safety and the actual safety. So all of them have their place. Okay, so I'm going to run through these different classes. So class 1, class 1, also called a multi-use path or a shared use path. These are fully separate facilities. It's a different grade than automobile traffic. So it's not like in the road. They're always two-way. They're shared with pedestrians, not just bikes. They could be next to a road, but they're not in it. They're not below the curb. Typically, class 1 paths are found on old rail rights of way, along creeks or rivers, occasionally next to a road, but not as frequent as we might like. They're considered low stress facilities, like really any the Bay Trail aims to be a class 1 path. It's something that everybody from your 8-year-old niece to your 80-year-old grandmother can ride on. In terms of width, they're minimum 8 feet wide, ideally closer to 12 feet, with, like you see here on the Milvay Sausalito path, with unpaved shoulders for jogging. Next, you have class 2 bike lanes. So these can be referred to as standard bike lanes or basic bike lanes or typical bike lanes. This is kind of what I would consider the bare minimum of bicycle accommodations. It's a space set aside, on the street where bicycles can ride, and it's better than nothing. You have a place to be. People can pat you. You're out of the way of cars. You have a place where you can travel forward. There's kind of a variation on bike lanes. You'll hear the term buffered bike lanes or a buffered class 2. So this bike lane you see here, this is in Oakland. This is 5 feet wide. Sometimes you'll see an extra little kind of hashed area just to the left of this. It's called a buffer. It's not a physical separation, but it's a little bit more space between passing cars and people biking or skateboarding. Class 2 bike lanes can work well enough in slow traffic if you're being passed at 20, 25 miles an hour. If you're going 15 miles an hour on a bike, it's not that bad. Problems with Class 2 bicycle lanes is that, I mean, anyone who's ever ridden a bike knows that very frequently you'll find a car stopped in it, for just a minute as they run in and do some errand. So you have pretty, depending on where you are, if you're in downtown, you'll have to be weaving in and out of the bike lane all the time because people are stopped in it. And so what's the point? Next, and this is a real safety issue, is the issue of dooring. Dooring just refers to someone opening a car door in front of the path of a person riding a bike. And actually, this is a kind of underappreciated danger of riding, especially if you get doored. You might not get hit in the dooring itself, but you usually fall off your bike when you get doored, or you hook your handlebar, and it might put you underneath of a car behind you. So especially on high speed areas or a downhill, Class 2 bicycle lane can be kind of dangerous for that reason. Next, they don't narrow the street, they kind of widen the street. And even though there's a line there, drivers can perceive, kind of wide open stretch of road in front of them, which can encourage speeding. And I mean, obviously, there's just no physical barrier between the driver and bicyclists. So if a driver drifts out of his or her lane, all they're doing is crossing a piece of paint. There's nothing to stop them from striking someone in that bike lane. And just kind of from a technical perspective, the minimum to be considered a bike lane is 4 feet wide. Narrower than that, it just has to be considered a shoulder, which you're still allowed to ride in, but it wouldn't ever have a bike stencil or be considered a bike lane as part of a plan. Ideally, you want it to be wider, at least 5 feet, with that 2-foot buffer I talked about. Next up are Class 3 bicycle routes. So a Class 3 bicycle route is typically just signs. They'll see like a green bicycle route sign, stencils like you see here on the ground, and not much else. They're typically designated on low volume neighborhood routes where bicyclists might want to find themselves. And so in that sense, Class 3 routes are much more of a wayfinding device than actually a means of separating people from car traffic. Well, they're separating people by car traffic by saying, hey, you should bike over here instead of on this busy road. You'll often see this, a Sharrow, which is a bicycle icon, and a chevron, or a bike boulevard stencil like this on many of those Class 3 bicycle routes. That's intended to demonstrate to riders the proper location for them to ride, i.e. not too close to car doors, and to suggest to motorists that bicyclists are allowed to ride there. The research shows that Sharrows result in marginally safer driver behavior from drivers, but I don't know, anecdotal evidence from many riders is highly mixed, and they are looked at with some derision by many. And in practice, Class 3 routes kind of get used by traffic engineers when they don't want to make any other trade-offs. When they don't want to reduce the number of vehicle lanes, or they don't want to get rid of parking, they'll say, hey, we made it a bike route, we put some stencils down, which without other traffic calming, without other kind of mechanisms to slow down drivers, it may not add much comfort to those low risk tolerant riders like my mom. There's no established width for this, but if a road is wide enough, you could fit in a Class 2 bike lane. So you wouldn't, if a lane is 15 feet, or we'll get to this later. If a lane is too wide, there's no reason why you'd have a Sharrow. You would just put in a bike lane. So they're usually used when there's on-street parking and the lanes are too narrow to fit a bike lane that don't have the extra 5 feet. Okay, one more, and then we'll take a quick break for questions. So so we can hold those for just 1 second. So Class 4 bike lane is a physically separated bike lane. the term is if there's vertical separation, so not just horizontal separation, but some element of vertical separation element, these weird engineering terms, that sits between the people riding bikes and automobiles. Unlike a class 1, a class 4 is bike only, not intended for pedestrians. A class 4 bike lane is in the roadway. They can be either one way, so one in each direction, or two way, like you see in this class 4 in San Rafael on Francisco Boulevard West. There are two examples of class 4 bike lanes in Marin. There's this one on Francisco Boulevard and a brand new one on East Blythedale Avenue in Mill Valley, between the Mill Valley Sausalito Pathway and the interchange, the 101 interchange. They have many benefits. So so depending on the, cool. Depending on what the separation is, they may, give kind of a warning. They may actually physically keep drivers out of the bike lane, or they may, give a kind of advanced warning to a driver who has crossed over the bike lane. Obviously, it would be hard to cross over these bollards here without noticing it, though they might not stop your car. They'll let you know if you've drifted off course. They have made challenges too, or I guess they can be challenging to convince either electeds or city staff to implement. Some of these are it takes up more space to do this than a normal bike lane. They may reduce parking because you typically have to do them at the curb. They're somewhat, well, depending on what you use, they're between slightly more expensive and way more expensive than just paint. And there can be some logistical issues with street sweeping, which is a solvable problem, but one that people use as an excuse not to implement them. Minimum one way is 5 feet with a 2-foot buffer, or a two-way 8 feet with a 2-foot buffer for two-way. Just real quick, I'm going to show you a few different. So I mentioned that they can be made of different things. I'm going to show just a few examples just to see the whole range of a class 4 bike lane. So these are what are called K71 flexible bollards. You might also see them using flex posts. This is the new bike lane in Mill Valley. This is a precast curb. So these are made elsewhere and bolted down. You might have a poured in place curb where they kind of, it's like a custom job for the particular street. It can be separated by parked cars as well. So you see this is a parking lane next to the driving lane. There's also some flexible bollards in there, or flexible posts, or it can be separated using K-rail or Jersey barriers, depending on where you're from. This is the Richmond San Rafael Bridge. Okay, that's a lot. We'll do a quick break to see if anybody has any questions that have come up so far. Okay, well, I've either put everyone to sleep or Dave's giving me a thumbs up. Everyone's good. So also, just for the record, if anything comes up at the end or you have any questions later, you can always reach me at warren@marinbike.org. I see that John has his hand up. John, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to get my hand up. Right by the Civic Center, train station, there's a little, kind of between McGinnis Parkway and the Civic Center, there's a little, is that a class 4?
I think that would be considered a class 1. That's the smart multi-use path. It is above the curb there. Yeah. I know it's just north of the station before you go up to McGinnis, right?
Just south of the station, actually.
Yeah, I mean, so generally the smart is all class 1. Okay. Pedestrians can use it. It's outside of the road bed. I will say there are some funny cases where it's like a little bit not clear whether it's class 1 or class 4. We would call that class 1 because it's a multi-use path, bi-directional, used by pedestrians above the curb.
Okay. I also saw somewhere that there's a restriction on e-bike class 3 e-bikes on bike paths. Can you talk a little bit about that when you get when the time is right?
Yeah, let me come back to that at the end because we have kind of a busy agenda. I will say it's confusing because we have these classes of e-bikes and we have classes of bike lanes, but yeah, I'll touch on that at the end. Just remind me when we get to the end, okay? Dave?
I found that green paint on the pavement can be helpful to identify bike lanes and maybe help alert drivers to stay out of this area or possibly to expect a bicycle. Maybe I'm just imagining that it's adding some safety, but I wonder what you thought about it.
Yeah, I think that green paint is great. I I don't know that I've seen the research on its role, but it is used increasingly, especially at conflict points. So if there's a bike lane that crosses a side street, there's a two-way stop, like you're on Butterfield Road and you're going up Butterfield and there's a two-way stop, you might use some kind of dashed green striping through that intersection to alert drivers that there might be bicycles coming from the side. They're typically not, I will say public works departments are kind of loath to make the whole bikeway green typically because it adds, to the expense of the project, you're putting down more thermoplastic. So typically it's used at those conflict points, but I support its use, definitely. Cool. Okay, anybody else?
Use a lot of it in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Of course, there's more density there of bicycles, so maybe they've been able to justify the cost. But
yeah, I mean, I think
great ad.
Yeah, I think we'll start seeing more of it in Marin. I mean, you saw it on the there's a little bit on the new Blythedale lanes. You saw it in San Rafael, and I think the new their Butterfield lanes being restriped in the San Anselmo section. I think we should get some green paint there too. So there's sometimes people have aesthetic objections to it, but I think safety should always outweigh aesthetics. Phil, you have your hand up?
Yeah, just for San Rafael specifically for green thermoplastic, it does seem that they're relatively supportive of that recently. I think the issue is it doesn't make sense to do small amounts of it. It makes sense for them to get a big old roll of it. And so it is my understanding that Public Works is sort of like saving up their projects. And then when they get a whole bunch of green thermoplastic, they put it down. So I do think there's going to be a lot more of that coming, and they're actively thinking of doing that.
Cool, that's helpful, Phil, thanks. Okay, diving back in. Okay, so next we're going to come to intersections. So we've talked about the mid-block sections, kind of what happens between intersections, and now we'll talk about intersections briefly. So one of the biggest challenges to biking often comes at intersections. So much so that NACTO, which is the National Association of City Transportation Officials, wrote a whole design guide called "Don't Give Up at the Intersection," recognizing that many streets are designed in such a way that even if there are bike lanes, even protected bike lanes at the mid-block section, once you get to the intersection, you're kind of bicyclists are sort of left to fend for themselves. And so I would say there are challenges and then types of crashes. So challenges, comfort going through intersections can, when cars are making right turns or trying to turn past you are challenging. Often you might have to execute what's called a weave, where if you're going straight and a driver is trying to turn right, you'll have to sort of switch places, which might work on the freeway, but is a little uncomfortable when you are in a bike. And left turns, especially if you're trying to make a left turn across multiple lanes of traffic on a one-way street, that could be a real challenge. There isn't a lot of, typically it seems like traffic engineers don't even imagine that bicyclists might want to turn left, which we do. And types of crashes that happen in intersections, you have a right hook, where again, that situation where you're going straight and a driver turns across you and you kind of broadside them. On a two-way facility, you might have what's called a left hook. Actually, if a driver is looking one way, expecting cars coming that direction, or bikes, but a bike is coming the other direction, that you might get pulled into. And also, the scariest thing is a high-speed broadside, someone running a light, or a bicyclist running a light and being hit by a car going in a cross direction. So there are a few ways of addressing these concerns and crashes. Kind kind of one way of improving left turns is what's called a bike box. This is just kind of a green area at the front, like of the intersection, just behind the crosswalk, behind the stop bar. Kind of sets up a place for bicyclists to filter up and then get ahead of the cars and maybe make a left turn before them. It's low cost, doesn't take up much space. Compliance might not be great as kind of drivers don't really know what it is, but it can represent an improvement. Usually it's best used for 2-lane roads, one each way. Oops, I went wrong direction. Oh, sorry there. Next, you have 2-stage left turn boxes. So this is a way to facilitate a left turn. It's like kind of Copenhagen left. So you see that little green box with the arrow. That's the place where a bicyclist going from left to right, instead of trying to turn across cars, would stop in that little box and sort of queue up to then go straight, up when the light turns green with the cross traffic. So this could be a better way of facilitating left turns on wider roads. Again, also low cost, kind of requires a larger intersection to do it. It's also not obvious to all riders what they should do, and it can be kind of uncomfortable to sit there as cars are whooshing past you. So next you have like the gold standard of improving intersections for bicyclists. This is called a protected intersection. So this addresses both right hooks and left turns. So if you, Matt, can you see my mouse? Is my mouse visible here?
Yes,
Great.
it is.
So just to trace with you here, if you were going north to the intersection, you would come on this little bike lane, you sort of come out to the side here, and then cross the street here as opposed to crossing through next to the cars. What this does is if there's a car if the driver is trying to make a left turn, they have to slow down before they make that turn. They can't whip around, and they also see the bicyclist more visibly in front of the car, as opposed to maybe through a window or the A column where visibility is more limited. And so for bicyclists going through, you kind of bend out, cross, bend back in, and go ahead. If you make a left turn, you're just kind of navigating the outside of the intersection. You go straight and then cross here and then come over here. And so all those places you're coming into much less conflict with cars, and you really have to sort of sprint across. Protected intersections are more expensive. Oh, there's also a lot less exposure for pedestrians because the crossing distances are shorter and drivers are coming more slowly. So there's benefits for everybody at these intersections. They're more expensive. It could be hard to convince engineering departments to do them. We don't have it in Marin yet. There are a number in the Bay. The city of Fremont has actually been adding a number of these with significant success. That was the picture I showed you up top. And hopefully we'll see more of this in the future. And the last, so I'll talk about a protected corner. This is just kind of like 1/4 of a protected intersection. These can almost be, it's not as good, but it can help a lot. This is actually a place where I almost got right hooked I would have been right hooked if this weren't there. So again, this accomplishes the same thing of bending the bicyclist out a little bit and forcing drivers to slow down on their turn. It's cheaper. It doesn't involve moving the whole curb. And they can be done with concrete, as you see here, or quick build, sometimes with those K71, beefy bollards. And kind of the dream scenario is what you call a Dutch roundabout. So these provide a dedicated space for riders. There's kind of a roundabout outside of the roundabout. Roundabouts are great for a lot of reasons. They reduce conflict points. There's a lot fewer crashes that can occur to them. There's really no possibility of a high-speed crash since you have to slow down the approach, and you can't really have a head-on, and it's hard to have a T-bone. So it's actually much safer for drivers as well. They're resilient during power outages. You can't, a driver can't knock down a light by running into them. So they're cheaper to maintain. They do require more space, and they can be expensive to develop in the first place, but the maintenance costs, as I mentioned, are much lower. Okay, I think we have another quick break for questions about, again, we're breezing over the whole grad degree here, but quick questions about intersections. Okay, not seeing anybody. We will move on. Okay. So I'm going to talk real quick about kind of touch on bike lane development a little bit, then we'll go into our hands-on exercise, which should be the fun part. Okay, so this is a slide from last month's webinar, just kind of very, very high level how a bike lane gets built. Steps involved, you have planning, design, environmental review, final approval by a deliberative body like the city council or the county, and then construction and funding happens. Funding is needed throughout. And so I just want to touch on the bicycle master plan, which is, I think, something that a lot of people don't understand. It's certainly something I didn't understand before I started doing this work. The bicycle master plan, what it does is it lays out what might happen, kind of what should happen. It doesn't mean things are it's not a mandate. It doesn't mean things will happen. It's kind of, you need it there, but it's not enough. You still need advocacy from me and folks like you. So the bike plan is really important in a lot of ways, though. It sets policies, it sets design guidelines, those things I was telling you about, like here's the minimum width of a bike lane versus a maximum width, preferred width. It sets those guidelines and says, hey, in the city of Mill Valley, in the city of San Rafael, this is how wide we want these facilities to be, or this is the kind of intersection we'll design. So it's really important in that regard. We talk about intersection treatments, and lastly, it kind of the meat of the bike plan is the network. So it decides it lays out a plan for which streets should have what types of bike lanes on them. So this lane gets a class 2, or so this street gets a class 2, this street gets a class 4, this street all we can fit is some signage, so it's a class 3. And that process is one that advocates have a role in. Typically, the bike plans are developed by consultants. Sometimes they're developed in-house, depending on the city. But advocates like you and me have a role in reviewing those kind of initial plans that are come up with and saying, hey, actually, I think that on this street that you said that you can only fit a class 2, I think we can actually fit a class 4. I think we can get some protection in there for bicyclists. And so it's really important to make those changes to the bicycle plans while they're still in development, because once they get passed by council, that kind of ends up being the marching orders for how public works designs projects going forward. So bikeways get built in a few different ways. One is through annual repaving. So every city has a budget where they go and repave a certain number of streets every year. Usually they focus on the ones that are kind of like the worst off, so you get the biggest bang for your buck. When you do this, there's limited potential for change. Typically, like they're not doing it. They're not going to put in, big barrier protected bike lanes during repaving. It's typically a chance to either widen a bike lane or put a bike lane in a place where there wasn't one, but there is room for one. These are funded with like the city's annual paving budget. There's money for this, and so it's important that if a city is doing a repaving on a street, we want them to at least bring that up to what they have in the bike plan. That doesn't always happen. It's not happening right now in the city of Larkspur, where they're repaving Magnolia, but not bringing it up to what's in the bike plan. But it doesn't have to happen during repaving. They can happen during a redevelopment if there is a hotel or a new apartment complex going in as a condition of development. Maybe SMART or the city of Nevada or might say, hey, you're building this thing here. We want you to build part of the SMART pathway, behind your new hotel here, or we want you to protect this bike lane. We have it, in the bike plan that's supposed to be protected. Right now, it's not. On your frontage, we want you to protect it. These tend to be rather small projects and not, long corridor wide projects. Lastly, you have discretionary projects. These are typically funded through grants. So the city says, hey, we want to redo, so the city of San Rafael had just applied for a new bridge over the San Rafael Canal between Harbor and Canal and the high school. So they applied for a grant to the state, and hopefully they'll get it. We wrote a letter of support. And if that happens, then they'll start working to build this project, build this new bikeway over the canal. So cities typically don't have their own money for this. It's kind of, it has to be on a one-off project basis. Some cities will vote to tax themselves for a dedicated funding stream, which can then be used for active transportation projects. Otherwise, that repaving, like I said, kind of typically just rebuilds things as they were without a lot of new changes. But those discretionary projects, like I said, have the biggest potential for change. Okay, that's a lot. What do we got? Q&A. Okay, I see Matt has his hand up, and go ahead, Matt.
I was just curious about the redevelopment portion. That is required as a stipulation in building a lot of the time?
It can be. It's on the city to do it. You know, when a city is deciding whether to approve a building permit, they can require what are called exactions out of a developer. They can say, we'll approve this if you do this thing. And the developer can say, like, no, or they, it's part of the negotiations. And so especially when there is, like, when there's a lot of the best time to build something new is when there's a lot of construction going on there already. So actually, it can be, maybe the city might chip in, but it's a great opportunity for kind of someone other than the city to pay for it. So example of this actually is happening right now is the Costco at Vintage Oaks in Novato. There was a project where it's kind of mired in some environmental stuff, but they were wanting to expand their gas station. And to do so, they had to build a bunch of new parking in the back on Roland Boulevard. And as a process of doing that, they're also building a Class 1 multi-use pathway all the way behind Costco. And that was something the city required of them to do. It was actually Bjorn, my predecessor's idea to do this. And so Costco is actually paying a large share of the cost to do that. Again, it's a shorter project, but actually in this case, a pretty important one.
That's great.
All right, anybody else? Okay, if you have any questions, again, email me at the end. Okay, so now we're gonna do a little hands-on workshop for the last 20 minutes here. We're gonna have breakout groups. So what this is gonna be, this is kind of just going back a couple slides, and I was talking about, hey, how do we, the public, know, how do we advocate for a bike lane in a place where it needs to be when the city says we can't do it? Part of that is coming up with reasonable, feasible plans. Like I could say, hey, we need a 20-foot wide bike lane on every street, bike path on every street, and that's not going to happen. So how do we find solutions that work within the existing street width, that we can use to convince public works or city council that, hey, this is a workable solution. So we're gonna just do a little exercise in kind of thinking about how we can reconfigure our streets. So there's a great little web app called Street Mix, and we're gonna use this. Street Mix is a application that it just exists in a browser. It's free to use. You don't have to even log in to use it. What it does is you take a width of street. So like here you see 60 feet wide, and you reimagine how to sort out those different different uses within that street. So here we say there's a couple lanes for driving, a turn lane, a parking lane, and wide sidewalks. Well, like there's no bike lane there. Is there a better use for parts of that street to put in a bike lane, to put in protected bike lane? Street Mix lets you play around with it. So I'm just going to show you real quick how this works, and then let you fend for yourselves in breakout groups. So Matt's going to get breakout groups ready, but I'm just going to show you how this works. So here's an example of a street some of you may be familiar with. Oh, I should go to existing. This is 2nd Street in San Rafael. So here's what it looks like today. The median in the middle, 2 lanes westbound, 2 lanes eastbound, parkings, narrow sidewalks. And so I can change this. I can say, I can click on here, and I want to remove this car lane. I want to remove this car lane, just come up here and click remove. And then maybe I want to narrow this car lane here to 11 feet, and then narrow this one to 11 feet. And then I want to, like, you know, put in a bike lane here, and I can change the direction of those bike lanes, so it's going the same direction of the car. And I'll put another, you know, another bike lane in here. Actually, we have a lot of space to work with still, so I'm just going to widen the sidewalks to, oops, 515 feet, 15 feet here, and 11 feet here. So it's pretty user friendly. You can have drag and drop as you want. You can widen things up. You can widen things up here with these plus and minuses, or you can see a wide variety of different things you can put in the right of way down here. Most of these are, you know, that you'll be using are sidewalk, bike lane, parking lane, drive lane, turn lane. Okay. So, and then, you know, at the end of it, you know, we played around with it. And then we got Centerfell, or there we go, Second Street. This is what we'll have when they're done with construction. Okay, so how this doesn't work is I'm going to put a link in the chat, and that'll have the links to the let me stop sharing for a second. That'll have links to the street mix, so you can just click on that street mix and pull it up. So we'll put you into breakout rooms. Just introduce yourself to your to everybody else in the room, and then you'll have 5 minutes to try to come up with a more friendly, reconfigure the streets to be more friendly for people biking. Then we'll bring you guys back. Some representative from your group can present, say this is what we came up with. I'll tell you what works and what doesn't. And then we'll go back and do the same thing again for a second one with what. All right. I realize I'm kind of throwing people in the deep end here without a ton of time. So, but there's only one way to learn. So does anyone figure out how to use Street Mix and have a reconfiguration of that street they want to show the group?
It took us a while to figure out how the UI worked and how to reduce sizes and move stuff around, but we managed to make the sidewalks too small and put bike paths on both sides.
Okay, cool. Do you want to share? Can you share screen and show it to me? You have it up?
Oh, sure.
Okay, so
we found
yeah,
we found it hard to move these guys around.
Yeah. I mean, the sidewalks have to be on the outside. So this is a street where we fit bike lanes in there. It's nice, but you know, it's going to be hard to ride a wheelchair on there. And there's you know, the driving lanes are still pretty wide. So you know, it's good we got bike lanes in there. That's great, Charles.
It's the best we could do, because it took us forever to figure out how to navigate the UI.
There's no grade. Don't worry about it. So if you ever need to remove something, you can just reach up and trash it. Cool. Anybody else you want to drop your share?
Yep.
Anybody else want to show one?
Sure.
Milan, I see. Or yeah, cool.
We had about a minute to get it to work.
Okay.
Because
this looks great.
I had a hard time getting Zoom to share, and then we had an interesting time just trying to get it to work. Yeah. So we.
This looks great.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, I love it. So this is a parking protected bike lane, and then so the parking gets to stay. That's nice. You won't have the neighbors fighting you. And we kept those 2 drive lanes. We got the bike lane on the going on the other side over here. Just one bit of feedback. We actually need we need half a foot more space between the bike lane and the parking protected bike lane, the parking, because that's kind of the rule. You need to have a 5-foot bike lane minimum, and then 2-foot buffer. Okay.
Oh, parking on there.
Yeah. But that's definitely perfect. Killed it. So just for everybody's edification, this is actually Bridgeway in Sausalito. Sorry, I should have had this pulled up, but that's what that was. It's Bridgeway, kind of on the seawall area right there. Doop. So that's what that looks like today. Cool. Okay. So now with your newfound knowledge, we're going to send you back one more time to try one more street, hopefully with a little experience under your belt. We can do that, and we'll come back, present, and wrap up. Okay. Any questions that I can answer before we do that? Cool. So in that cheat sheet, you should see a link to street number 2. So you can pull that sample street up, and Matt can send you. Okay. How's everyone doing? A little better that time? Second time's a charm. Okay. Who has a street they would like to share? Nemilana, I see your hand up. Oh, I love it.
We went all the way.
That's great. No, I love it. Creativity. But yeah, tell us what we have here.
So we removed the 2 lanes for driving, and we replaced them with the 4 lanes, and we replaced them with just 2 of them. Left the planting intact, put in a parking lane, and then 2 light rail, because it's slow to drive now, so you can take the train.
I love it.
Amazing. And 1 bike lane that's also multi-use, so it's bi-directional multi-use. And we found some space for a parklet right there.
Oh, lovely. Very cool. That's fun.
We needed a symbol for a multi-use path, and we were lacking that.
Yeah.
I love it. That's great. Anybody else?
I'm too embarrassed to show anything.
That's fine. We're all
Yeah, I think
learning.
we got beat.
What do you got, Dave?
Oh, it's like, it's totally not worth showing, but weak sauce.
That's great. So widen sidewalks, especially on the right side there. Got a 2-way bike lane, 2-way raised bikeway. That's nice. With parking separating there, and then still keeping all the parking and the both the drive lanes. So no drivers will get upset about this one. They'll probably still get upset, but this is great. No, it's great. The one thing I would say is that medians, that may be a little tough with that very small median, but you could probably get space for that by narrowing the parking lanes down to 7 and narrowing 2 of the driving lanes down to 10.
Okay, so all right.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, my traffic standards are a little rusty, or minimum.
It's quite all right. Okay, great. And just to show everyone where this is, that section, that little cross section, was Point San Pedro Road, just east of the high school. Cool. Okay, well, thank you everyone for bearing with me and doing our hopefully somewhat edifying exercise there. Again, don't expect to know how to do this afterward, but just getting people thinking about this. Streetmix.net is this tool where you can practice and rethink about how to reconfigure our public right-of-way, because the space between the curbs is the place we all share. It's owned by in many cities, the most public land is the streets. And we know the ways we have allocated them up till now has emits a lot of greenhouse gases and results in a lot of people getting hit by cars or hit in cars. So we need to think about ways to reconfigure them, and StreetMix is a tool to do that. Okay, great. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to wrap things up. Just want to give a quick. Oh, John has his hand up. Yeah.
Just wanted to remind you to talk about e-bikes on the paths.
Cool.
Rules are.
We'll talk after we let everybody else out. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Cool. So just quick plug for MCBC local teams. So again, we're starting in San Rafael, local advocacy teams to bring together our expertise at MCBC with people's local knowledge and connections in those cities. So we're trying to find interested people like you to be part of this, and I really appreciate everyone coming out here and working on learning how to be bike activists. Our role is in helping goal setting, helping with technical support, providing use of our logos and letters, And what we need from you is, to help, a commitment to meeting regularly, to grow the team, to help us build partnerships with other like-minded organizations, and help advocate for better biking in San Rafael. So we're so we're gonna be scheduling I put this on the email today. So if you are not already, you can, I'll send this out to everybody who's here tonight, but there's a local team's interest survey just to say you're interested in being part of the San Rafael local team or somewhere else in Marin once we start them up. We're starting in San Rafael, but we have more in the works. If you have done that already, that's great. You'll already be on a email list, which is just sanrafael@marinbike.org. And so we'll be having an in-person goal setting meeting to talk about kind of what the team's goals should be for the coming year for the San Rafael local team. And that's going to be Thursday, August 11th at 6:30 at Tam Commons. So put that down. If you can't make it, that's great. I'll be soliciting feedback from everybody in the group. We want to hear from you too, but that'll be a nice time to be out there if you can make it.
Quick plug also about that date. I'll be there, and then we actually have an MTC sponsored bridge ride in September. They approved us doing a full moon bridge ride, so I'm gonna go check it out. That night is also the next full moon, so if anyone wants to do a bridge ride on the August full moon, I'll be doing that after that meeting.
It'll be a blast because I'll be riding back to the East Bay, so we can
Yeah.
all ride the bridge together. That'll be fun.
Perfect.
Anyway, well, so thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate everyone's time on a Wednesday night. And if you ever have any questions, please shoot me an email at warren@marinbike.org. And just big thanks to Matt for all the technical assistance tonight. So hope everyone has a great night and see y'all soon.